Good morning and welcome to this session of the Edward Thomas Literary Festival. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, the poet Alison Brackenbury. Alison is an award-winning poet whose most recent collection, Skies, was selected by The Observer as a Poetry Book of the Year in 2016. She is frequently broadcast on BBC Radio 3 and 4, including during the lockdown when she was poet in residence for a week for Radio 4's The Front Row programme. Gallop, her selected works, was published in 2019, and you can find all of her new poems along with more information about Alison herself and all the work she's done in the past on her website, the link which can be found in the comments section here, and we'll also put at the end of the video as well. But without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand you over to the wonderful poet Alison Brackenbury. Enjoy.
Hello. I'm delighted and honoured to be reading to you. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but to sit in a small room with books near a green garden does seem to catch some of the contradictions of Edward Thomas. I think of Thomas as both restless and rooted. My first poem explores some of the roots of his writing. It highlights the nature writer, Richard Jefferies, whose biography Thomas wrote. In this poem, the wren belongs to Jefferies' childhood bedroom in a small farmhouse near Swindon, which I have seen. But the thrushes, the wet walks, and the loved and lost rented homes belong to Thomas. The poem is called The Country Writers, Edward Thomas, Richard Jefferies, and many others. They lingered by cool dairies' yellow milk, which we never dreamed of or saw. Children sipped froth beside the hot stacks through a hollow straw. They scared 100 sparrows from eared corn, woke to their thrushes' common song. The line of rooks which flared the sky to roost stretched 5 miles long. First, all they wanted was to tramp all day, out in the air, though soaked or cold. They rented rooms, but the old farmer died. Those hills were sold. My shepherd grandfather got up at dawn, so he could pause and watch young badgers play. They wrote in London, fought deadlines, smoked life away. Were woods, the wren in bedroom, true, or just a dream behind a hurt child's eyes? Today I saw 100 peacocks whirl, swallows fill skies. I did not dream of butterflies, but sought in hot town rooms before first engines hum, my visa for your country, to which I have not yet come. Thomas's grandfather was a railway worker in Swindon. During his holidays there, Edward trespassed in the local woods and became friends with an old countryman. In her vivid memoirs, Helen Thomas describes a visit to him. As Helen and Edward were not yet married, when they stayed in his cottage, the title of my next poem appears in quotation marks, Honeymoon. They fled by train to a poacher Edward named Dad. His own father made the civil service rather than risky Dad's wood cottage. Green lit thatch like oaks, the emerald sheen of pheasants' necks Dad wrung unseen. Helen woke to a stitched quilt, lace, wet primrose by her breakfast place. Dad's wife with bonny, gap-toothed face. The old voice told her, life turns hard. You must stew turnips, eke out lard. Then Edward called her from the yard. They swam, unclothed, no thought of wrong, sang in broad lamplight, song on song. They would live so their whole lives long. But when both longed in flight to stay, Granny with Dad had moved away near Swindon's red-bricked railway. In 2014, I went to the village of Steep in Hampshire to contribute to a Radio 4 programme about Helen Thomas. The next 3 poems spring from that eventful day. The first is based on a letter from Edward to Helen, written 3 weeks before he was killed in the First World War. The daughter they called Baba is their youngest child, Myfanwy. The second poem is set in the garden of number 2 Yew Tree Cottages, Thomas's last full-time home in England, which we visited by kind permission of its private owner. The very short final poem reflects upon something quite unexpected which happened to me by that cottage door. I think that a place can hold a memory of a person which, happily in this case, has become quite distinct from the person himself. Here are 3 poems from Steep. Number 1, Letter, 1917. I had one dream in France, curled up before the fight. I fell past the bugles, stray blackbirds, stabs of light, landed by our table, when you, clasped Baba, smiled to me. I was a sort of visitor, and I could not stay for tea. Number 2, Yew Tree Cottages. This was your garden, and the grass is long, rough as a child's hair. The wind gusts strong. Only the half-pruned hazels in the hedge shelter the new stone pigs by the path's edge. Your wormwood bush in bud, high fat for birds, you might have bought if men paid more for words. Stray vegetables, too few to meet your needs, break old black garden soil, part raked for seeds. Could we live here with scattered book or tool? Does the cramped house recall you, kind or cruel? It does not know you. It is not unkind. The brief hail gone, spring nuzzles hard behind, bends primroses. March light, like your hair, thinned, sweeps us down your cracked path, out with the wind. Number 3, Visitor. But while I wait by that low door, where he would stoop, though rarely shout, I sense harsh pressure thrust me back, someone in pain who must walk out. I believe that Helen Thomas's friends encouraged her to write of the happy times with Edward. So I thought I should read a tiny poem. This is based on an early episode in Helen's memoirs, when Edward comes into her father's garden and finds that she has been tree climbing. The poem is called After. But let us think of them at last, as they might always want to be. The boy with the soft voice, the girl who swung bare toes from a cherry tree. Edward Thomas's poems contain many affectionate and beautifully observed accounts of birds. So, with admiration and trepidation, I would like to read 2 of my own bird poems. The subject of the first is one of the many birds which have become far less common than they were in Thomas's lifetime. The poem is called Lapwings. They were everywhere. No, just God or smoke is that. They were the backdrop to the road, my parents' home, the heavy winter fields from which they flashed and kindled and uprode the air in dozens. I ignored them all. What are they? Oh, peewits. Then a hare flowed, bounded the furrows. Marriage, child. I roamed round other farms. I only knew them gone when, out of a sad winter, one returned. I heard the Highmox cry, peewit, so long cut dead. I watched it buckle from fast air to lure hawks from its chicks. That time had gone. Gravely the parents bobbed their strip of stubble. How had I let this green and purple pass? Fringed, plumed heads, full name, the crested plover, fluttered. So crowned cranes stalk Kenya grass. Then their one child, their anxious care, came running, squeaked along each furrow, dauntless, daft. Did I once know the story of their lives? Do they migrate from Spain or coasts cold run? And I forgot their massive arcs of wing. When their raw cries swept over, my head spun with all the brilliance of their black and white, as though you cracked the dark and found the sun. When I wrote the next poem, I had only seen its subject twice, near Oxford, where, like Thomas, I had studied, then left. But there is a happy postscript. Although I grew up in the country, I now live in a town. Like Thomas in London, I roam its green borderlands. And here, over a murky stream, I saw this stunning bird again. The poem is called Flash. In Kenya, to Bleached Branch it came, noon's bird, malachite kingfisher. Even the broad beak borrowed flame. At Rusian was the charwell there, with friends who later trekked through hell. Sun's amber, fallen skies, lit air. Near Oxford, by the stained canal, your latest love turned unkind. You watched rainstorms fade, wings burned banks blue. When the drab days unwind you, do not put streams behind you. Wait for the light to blind you. Here is an extract from a letter. Very exciting. Some red kites introduced a year or two ago have definitely settled here and are easy to recognise by their distinctive forked tails. The signature on this letter is Thomas. Myfanwy Thomas, Edward's youngest child. I am deeply grateful to her for corresponding with me briefly in 2004. I asked about the folk songs which Thomas sang daily with his family. These have been noted by writers far better informed than me, such as Edna Longley and the late, much-missed Roy Palmer. But I think that the influence of these songs on Edward Thomas's poems is still underestimated. Here is what Myfanwy wrote to me, generously, in stuttering biro. I'm 94, and my memory very clear in many ways. For instance, I know the English titles of the Welsh songs, Watching the White Wheat, Hunting the Hare, A Lullaby, and another very jolly one about the seashore, which my father sang. He much enjoyed singing in the company of others round the fire, like Puffin or Muffin Marston, who had sailed with Shackleton, and who no doubt taught him the sea shanties, such as Farewell, Spanish Ladies, What Shall We Do with a Drunken Sailor, Hunting the Whale, Shenandoah, and many others whose names I forget. Then more secular folk songs. All round my hat I will wear a green willow, The Garden of Love, To Ken John Peel, Early one morning, on the bank of the sweet primroses, Sweet William, the Squire of Islington, John Blunt. Like my own grandfather, who taught me raucous songs from the First World War, Thomas loved the music he heard on marches, as Myfanwy recalled. When he joined up, he brought home several soldiers' songs. God blimey, O'Reilly, you are looking well, with which I rejoiced a very prim elderly lady who asked me to sing some nice songs our parents taught us. She, alas, was very shocked at such crudity. Goodness, how I do rattle on. As you can tell, Myfanwy did not rattle. The next short poem is my tribute to her, her father, and her family, singing in that cottage at Steep. The poem is called Edward Thomas's Daughter. Now winter prowls upon the hills. I write to her, her head so old, the war before the last war fills her mind. She lists her father's songs. A man, I tell her, I admire, who steps as close as a lost child. They sang, she tells me, by the fire, wild army songs before he died. My fingertips once touched that world. I saw it linger, washing boil, the fire chill as long ashes curled. Will Russia's gas put out our lights? The robin brushes me at dusk. Our good bones fail. We leave no mark. His voice, she writes, was clear and quiet. I hear him singing in the dark. Finally, as we slide into winter, here is a poem which begins with a dark night in my own home village in Lincolnshire. I should mention that this poem comes from Gallop. My selected poems, published last year by Carcanet. You can find my books, new poems, and contact details on my website. You can also find me and many nature photos on Instagram, Facebook, and as A. Brackenbury in capitals on Twitter. I must explain a couple of words which may be as strange as Britain's complicated past. Temple refers to the Knight Templars, the controversial crusading monks who once controlled part of the village. Gath is a Viking word, which here means farmyard. The poem is called Skies. It began like wonder, back there in the village's dark huddle, which I can never visit, like a star. In high orbit, warm muddle, my father's hard-packed arms I passed. Winter wind stilled, hedge and puddle, pure ice. Above my wreath of breath, the weak eye of the one streetlight, beyond Back Lane and Temple Gap. Skies pricked with white until the night swam with its stars. In their grave blaze, They filled my gaze like wings in flight, which never left. Unlike the house, the anxious moves, my mother's care. For years I stood by my own house, with books and charts. My father there could only name the tilted plough he followed with the snorting pair. But I found Pegasus, the slow sweep of the swan, a fierce red eye, the bull. I watched the hunter go, with frostbelt, over towns where I now lived, where still the galaxy, boiled by his sword in clouding sky. The books are laid aside. I see new roofs, more weak lamps, world and free, the stars, my calm dead, walk with me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was wonderful. I hope that you all enjoyed that at home. I certainly did, listening to it again. So again, a big thank you to Alison. I hope that you're able to join us for the Q&A and discussion session coming up on Zoom. You should have received the invitation email with the link to that Zoom session at some point during the booking stage or after booking. But don't worry if you haven't, it is coming up after I've said goodbye. But before I do that, just like to remind you that there is a whole host of events going on as part of the Literary Festival. They've either already happened, and you can catch up on those on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to the channel, you'll be able to see everything that we've got and get updates when we upload stuff into the future. You can also visit our website to see the upcoming programme events. And again, the link for that is in the comments, and hopefully at some point it'll appear at the end of the video as well. But for the moment, I'm going to say goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you along with Alison at the Q&A and discussion session to follow. So, goodbye.